Go look at the Stitch video. I've never heard anything like this a day in my life. Look at the Stitch video. This lady right here is Kenyan, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And she said that white people are good for them. Basically, despite all the extraction, despite everything. Okay. I want to talk about that. All right. That particular thing right there, that's what I want to talk about. The reason why Black American perspectives and many, not all, many perspectives in Africa clash and clash hard. Okay. The difference is that people like her, and there are many people like her, they have been thoroughly, thoroughly brainwashed. And when I say brainwashed, I'm not using that term loosely. That was their bondage. And I'm going to read you something, okay? Whereas Black Americans, my forefathers, we weren't. So the bondage was different. Ours was more physical, and we had our intellectuals that we learned from underground that was anti everything the white people were pushing during slavery. Was anti. We always had our leaders and our underground teachings to make us love ourselves, okay? Versus what happened to people like her, and I'm saying people like her because I'm saying that on purpose because I know everyone isn't like her in on the continent of Africa. So that's why I'm saying it. People like her or see things like her, they have been brainwashed, not just her generation, but the generation since they were colonized. So they had a psychological bondage, and it was done on purpose, and that's the hardest one to break. They were broken internally. Black Americans weren't broken internally, they were broken internally. So I'm going to read this, okay? Because I had to do a deep dive because baby, listen, we see life totally different. Different histories of colonization versus enslavement. Black Americans are the descendants of people who were forcibly taken from Africa and enslaved in the Americas. Africans in places like Kenya experienced direct colonization on their own land under systems that extracted, ruled, and psychologically reshaped them while they remained at home. This matters because Black Americans were disconnected from Africa physically, but remained culturally and politically resistant to white domination. In contrast, many African societies experienced colonial education, language, etc., as normal for generations, often internalizing colonial values far more deeply than Black Americans. Black Americans had a counter education, okay? Many Black American scholars, elders, activists worked consciously and strategically to preserve, revive, and teach the truth about slavery and racism, resistance movements, white supremacy, and psychological effects, even African heritage. These efforts were often underground or community driven. Okay, and we have multiple, like the list goes on and on. Um, the result is that many Black Americans developed a critical consciousness, which we do have, that helped them reject whitewashed versions of history and teach their children to be proud of being Black. That created a generational counter narrative that was powerful. So I'm going to stop right here Black America isn't mentally enslaved. Now watch this. It was much harder for colonized Africa, example Kenya, to create and maintain a generational counter narrative. Their colonial rule was longer term and more institutionalized, especially in the school system, physically enforced through military violence, mass incarceration, and land theft. Lacking in independent media, publishing, or critical institutions. So while there were African intellectuals and resistors, their ideas were often suppressed. They were exiled or killed, erased from school curricula, dismissed by Western elites as radical or backward. Plus, colonizers cut off intergenerational transmission of the truth. Elders were disempowered, languages lost, and oral history devalued. In short, colonialism in Africa was designed to kill resistance at the root and often succeeded in making the oppressed believe their own inferiority. Therefore, the perspective on Europeans is different for a reason. Many Black Americans view Europeans historically as enslavers, racists, and exploiters, with a deep awareness of systemic oppression. So Black Americans see the systemic oppression. Meanwhile, in places like Kenya, some people still see British as developers or orderly rulers. Due to the way colonialism was packaged and remembered, there is sometimes a nostalgia for colonialism, even especially when post-independence governments have failed their people. That's not because Kenyans are less intelligent or aware. It's because colonialism broke the cultural, historical, and educational tools needed to resist the mental programming. So many Kenyans were broken mentally, enslaved mentally, walking around without the chains, mentally enslaved. Whereas Black Americans were enslaved physically. But you know how we do. Our forefathers secretly and have always secretly taught us to resist. So we weren't caught up. You know what I'm saying? We had underground, like the Underground Railroad. We had when they thought we were going to church, we had an educational system going on in the church. All that right there in the basement. Or while they thought we were just going to church, we went to church, but also we had classes underground. And it was quiet. It was not found out. We had secret languages and all. But in Africa, they were broken mentally. Over the longer term, they were boom, boom, boom. We're going to enslave them mentally. So they knew what they were doing. And this is why our perspectives clash so much. Black Americans had access to radical thinkers and underground education that helped resist whitewashing. In Kenya and many other African societies, colonialism disrupted intergenerational knowledge and imposed a deeper psychological occupation. This created a difference in how Europeans are remembered, oppressors versus civilizers. But, wow. So a lot of times when Black Americans speak to people from Africa, there's a huge clash because we aren't enslaved here, or they were broken here, which would mean they can be exploited easier.